majority of the problem, yeah, okay, great. So you see the majority of the problem, across many countries as well as India, is that people are aware, about the environmental issues, but we do, many of them do not know why they're prominent or why exactly, we're supposed to work on them. And even people who know why they're going to work on them, they don't know how to take action, they don't know how to change, right? So we as Leap, want to provide this platform, especially for high school and middle school students, the group, and especially ambitious group who want make a difference, especially the group that has, I believe, the least opportunity in India and many other countries, to change, right? And then we also want to ride the wave of change, that India is going through right now as we see slowly more Indians, adopting more sustainable practices. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Right. So some simple practices are adopted into daily lives in most cities in India. And this helps them live a very environmentally sustainable life. And it's been practiced for so long now that it's almost a part of Indian culture. Right. So first is reusing and recycling. So most old clothes, bed sheets are used or dusters and things like that. And additionally, old clothes are also passed down within families and donated to those in need. Sorry. And this helps us not subscribe to the idea of fast fashion, which is obviously a very polluting industry today. And another very interesting phenomenon in India is that of the kabadiwalas. So old newspapers and any waste papers are sold to people called kabadiwalas who then sell it to recycling plants. So obviously this creates livelihoods, but it also helps dispose papers in a very efficient way, and it helps in being environmentally sustainable as well. So additionally, bucket baths and sun-dried clothes are a very common phenomenon in India. So bucket baths just help you save water because when you use a shower, you tend to waste a lot more water, and same with the bathtub as well. And on the other hand, sun-dried clothes also help in killing bacteria that are present on clothes. So that's also that helps increase your hygiene levels as well as be more environmentally sustainable because you're not wasting any electricity with dryers and stuff. So another thing is the disdain that is looked towards food wastage. So during weddings and ceremonies and any other social gatherings, the food wastage is considered to be very minimal, and people are not very encouraged to waste food. So you only take in as much food as you can eat, and then you consume whatever you have taken. And so another practice within these gatherings is is using of banana leaves. So meals are consumed on banana leaves instead of disposable plates and other disposable cutlery. So these banana leaves are then composted with whatever remains may be there on your leaf. And the food waste is often used to create biogas, especially in rural areas as well.
Today, India is moving towards new heights of eco-friendliness and sustainability with regards to the sustainable measures that take place in cities today. Um, have you ever heard of a city where no person is discriminated based on race, religion, or creed? Yes, you heard that right. That's Oroville. Or today in Oroville, over 3,000 people live from 58 different nationalities. Oroville is a city in South India promoted towards human unity. And today it is a leader in eco-friendly designs and sustainability. One of the most interesting projects that is happening in Oroville today is the treehouse communities. Today, people in Oroville live in tree houses, which are made from renewable materials and from inclusive designs. And these tree houses attempt to create a connection with our human with the nature. Another interesting aspect of Oroville is the use of renewable resources such as solar energy and wind energy. For example, in Oroville, the kitchen uses a solar dome that can save up to 2/3 of energy requirements during sunny days. And the building of houses in Oroville is also a noteworthy thing at Oroville, where Orovillians take inspiration from primitive housings, which were made up of clay and mud as foundations for buildings, making this a very eco-friendly method of house design.
So post the colonial period in India, the city of Chandigarh was filled with unmanaged waste and sanitation problems. The involvement of the government in introducing waste management and sanitation policies, along with the cooperation from citizens itself, has helped it come a very long way. Speaking of citizens and their roles in sustainability, so the rock garden in Chandigarh itself is a very big example. So this is a rock garden that consists of sculptures and structures made entirely of domestic and industrial waste. The sculptures are made using bottles, glass bangles, tiles, ceramic pots, sinks, and electrical waste collected from demolition sites all over the city. What is most fascinating about this that it was a secret initiative started and eventually grew into a citywide movement.
Okay, now about some of the environmental work that's been going on in India. So if you ever visit India, you'll immediately realize that it has a diverse natural environment, from the world's tallest mountains and a multitude of rivers and large coastlines on both sides. But in recent times, rapid industrialization has caused this natural beauty to be increasingly polluted with residential and industrial waste. And this has impacted not only the flora and fauna, but also local communities who have been living self-sustainable lifestyles. Their communities have come under threat. And thankfully, people are starting to show awareness about these problems. And a lot of work is now taking place to try and reverse some of these problems. One of the best examples of this is Afroz Shah, who became increasingly frustrated by polluted beaches in Mumbai. And a few years ago, he and his neighbor began visiting Versova Beach every day to try and do their part to clean it up. And after a few weeks, their movement gained traction, and they now have over 130,000 volunteers who support their cause, nearly half of which are students. And they've successfully managed to clean up the beach, and are even now they're working every week. They do cleanups in similar beaches and marshy areas, and have significantly improved the ecosystem in Mumbai. Another interesting aspect of sustainable practices is ecotourism in the mountains. So trekking and hiking is very common in India because it has a vast and diverse range of mountain ranges. But the problem was that trekkers and hikers were often careless with their litter, and this led to the mountain tracks becoming increasingly polluted. But recently organizations like India Hikes, that organize treks and hikes for people, have started giving out eco bags to all the travelers, and encourage everyone to actively collect and pick up litter from the mountain trails while trekking. And they've managed to collect a huge amount of waste from this, which is being recycled and reused. And even bricks are even made out of plastic waste, which is then used to build homes and schools.
I'll now be talking about another initiative that has been most recently taken by India and is one of the most recent environmental activism initiatives, and that is Rally for Rivers. So the Rally for Rivers is an initiative that has drawn thousands of people at over 180 public events, and it's the largest public endorsed mass awareness campaign in history. Supported by over 162 people, the Rally for Rivers is the world's largest ecological movement today. The Rally for Rivers provides a comprehensive solution to save India's rivers, and is unique in its structure as a primarily economic program with a significant ecological impact. The revitalization of rivers in India draft policy recommendation was handed over by Sadhguru to our Prime Minister Narendra Modi after the culmination of the launch campaign on October 2nd, 2017. And the Rally for Rivers is now focusing on rapid implementation of the solution through detailed studies and on-the-ground action in several states. The Rally for Rivers itself is mainly focused on planting trees on riverbanks because this has a multi-pronged approach. Firstly, it reduces soil erosion. Secondly, it protects diversity. It combats droughts in the area. It improves water quality. It reduces floods, and it combats climate change. The Rally for Rivers campaign mainly focuses on the river Kaveri, which is located in the Deccan Plateau of India. But since the Kaveri spans such a long river range and has many little rivers as well, we believe that this would end up in revitalization the entire Deccan Plateau, which would be incredibly useful for the biodiversity of India itself. And now we'll be talking a little bit about our work at LEAP.
Yeah. First, we talk about the Lake Revival project, right, which is a fundraising campaign which we worked with organizations such as Rotary Indiranagar and IIT for IT, raising over 7 lakhs for rejuvenating lake in Bangalore.
I'll be talking about the tree plantation, which was a citywide tree plantation drive that we conducted in Bangalore in India. We conducted a virtual walkathon fundraiser, and the funds from this will then be used to conduct a tree plantation in Bangalore to increase the green coverage of our city. One of our other projects was titled Greenworks, which was an international student-led competition to promote environmental awareness among school children. We had 3 competitions: Spectrum, which was a best out of waste competition for the primary years; Upgrade, which was an upcycling competition for the middle school; and Circular, which was a composting challenge for high schoolers.
Yeah, another one of our flagship projects is the Environmental Education Video Series, right, where we have members all across from around the world, I believe around 5 countries, right? This video series not only aims to raise awareness, but also provide implementable solutions to various environmental issues ranging from waste management to the management of land.
So on this slide, you can see some pictures of the projects that we have done. So on the left-hand side, you can see a picture of the community collection drive, where we collected e-waste, books, footwear, and a lot of, and we safely recycled them. And on the top right, you can see a picture of the Lake Revival project, which we had done to conduct a fundraising campaign over 7 lakh rupees in order to rejuvenate the lake, as Rahul mentioned. And on the bottom, you can see the Greenworks competition. Some of the people's submissions for the competition. So to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us on social media on those tags that are provided below.
So this was us as LEAP. My name is Shrishti, and we have Siddhant, Konik, Rahul, and Sati as well. Yeah, thank you so much. So following our presentation, we had a couple of questions that we thought we might want to discuss with some of you. And if you have any thoughts on them, please feel free to go ahead and share them by either raising your hand or putting them in chat. Siddhant, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, okay. So these are just discussion questions, and think about them, and maybe we can come up with some interesting ideas. Okay, so the first is, how do you think lifestyle habits can be improved so we can be more sustainable? Yeah, so if anyone has any thoughts, if you would like to. It can be like simple practices that we do at home, and yeah, some things that we do without thinking on a day-to-day basis, but which can actually be environmentally detrimental and can be made much more sustainable.
Hi.
Yeah, Pallavi, go ahead.
Yeah. So, few practices that maybe could be implemented in, day-to-day life, like our family does this quite a bit, is that we don't switch on the lights like at all in the morning until and unless like it's absolutely required, and we keep our curtains open like till the maximum amount. And even like during the night or like during evening, we keep our lights to a minimal. So if there are like four lights in a room, probably just switch on only one if needed. And if you don't need one, you can just probably just keep that switched off. Like, you don't need to keep it on continuously. And also, there's not a need of probably switching on the fan if it's not needed. This is a practice I've been trying to adapt all times. That if I'm somewhere else, I make sure to switch off every single switch in the room and then exit the room and go around saving as much as I need. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I think considering a lot of our energy still comes from carbon-based fuels, wasting energy actually leads to a great impact, negative impact on the environment. So little things like switching off fans and lights whenever they're not in use can definitely make a difference.
I think the same applies to water usage as well. I think if you're just wise about how much water you're using when you wash your hands and don't use more than what you actually need, it would help, like it would go a long way.
Yeah, okay, Ira, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that Stuti talked about it a little bit, but the idea of just like reducing the amount that like my family has bought clothes over the last couple of years at least, like we've significantly cut down on that. And the fast fashion industry has been really significant in creating environmental waste. So just pulling that down, reusing what we have, like learning how to sew to sort of like fix old clothes so that we don't have to get rid of as much, has been pretty impactful for me personally, and just like living a more eco-friendly life.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Mandy, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Okay,
Mandy. Hi, all. So personally, like I've talked to my parents or like especially my mom about things that we could do. And then she brought up like diet because my family eats like meat and plants. And she was like really intimidated by the idea of going like fully vegetarian or fully vegan because it would just like take a lot of time to like get around that and think about that. And obviously you have to like be careful about your nutrition if you're gonna change your diet like that. But then we talked about how like we don't necessarily have to go like full vegetarian. We could just reduce our meat consumption, which is like a much more feasible goal that we could do, especially given that like my parents are the ones that like cook most of the time and they don't really like have the time to dedicate to like switching our entire diet. So yeah, just like not necessarily having to go like all the way, but like just cutting down on your consumption on certain things.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think meat consumption, there's been a lot of talk going on recently about the potential downsides of the environment. And yeah, for many people, it's not feasible to just completely change your entire diet. But yeah, so trying to cut down on your meat consumption would definitely go a long way, though.
And I
yeah,
think another important aspect, if it's hard to cut down on all your meat consumption, having locally sourced or organic meat can definitely make a difference as well. Because it means, chemicals or animal rights that are harmed in the process too. It's an entirely ecological issue. So just making sure the meat you're getting is from a good place can definitely make a difference.
Yeah, that's actually a good point because if you have locally sourced meat, then the travel distance to your place is reduced, and obviously the larger the travel distance, the more pollution and other environmental damage that is involved during the travel process itself. So yeah, so look, even if you are consuming meat, if you can find a way to make sure that it's locally sourced, that would definitely make a difference. Okay. Yeah, Krishna, and then Varun will come to you.
Yeah, so one thing that's become a big part in my life is waste segregation. So I go to a boarding school, and I think a couple of years ago we started segregating waste, and it's really helped with the recycling too. So basically, this at our school at least there's two bins. One is for dry waste, one's for wet waste, and the wet waste is great for. Is also used for composting. We have a small garden slash farm that we started behind the school a few years ago, and we did a bit of composting there. And the dry waste is sent for recycling. And the segregation really speeds up the process, because even though they do some segregation at the recycling plant, by splitting it up at the source, it speeds it up and like lets them recycle a lot more. So yeah, so segregation was a big part for me.
Yeah, and I think it's much easier if you start segregating at the source. Like even in your room, if you have one bin for wet waste and one bin for dry waste, it's just easier for you to then dispose it later on. So definitely, yeah.
Okay, yeah, Varun.
Yeah, so I think Krishna had mentioned this point pretty much already, but composting is another way to like increase sustainability, right? Because like my family, we moved into a new house sometime last year, and now we started like a garden at home, and we're composting actually all of our like waste materials from cooking and like anything else, and we found it really easy to do that, and it's just excuse me. I think composting is actually one of the we start along with segregation. Like segregation and composting go together, because once you start segregating, you can start composting, and that just really reduces a lot of the waste going just out of like your house and stuff that's being useless or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Composting can help you reduce your waste at home. And Azalea?
Yeah, so I kind of want to talk about East Asian culture a little bit, actually, within American culture. So it's kind of interesting, but basically we have a lot of machines that help us clean things like washer dryers and the dishwasher. And for East Asians, I don't know if you guys can relate to, but we wash it by hand and then we put it in the dishwasher as a drying rack. So we don't actually use the dishwasher at all. Mandy's giving a thumbs up. But I think we recently realized and saw some stats that like some more efficient dishwashers than the ones that have come out actually waste less energy and water. And so we've been recently using the dishwasher and running it only when it's incredibly full. And I think that applies for all the other appliances, just like switching it out for the more higher tech efficient ones that save on energy.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because if you're using a dishwasher, then I think there are studies that have shown that using a dishwasher can be, depending on the dishwasher though, can be more water saving than actually washing by hand. But again, it depends if you're washing it first and then sometimes people like rinse the vessels completely and then again use the dishwasher, which doesn't make too much sense. At least I've seen that happening too in India here too. And so, yeah, that's an interesting cultural point, I guess. That's something we need to be more mindful of. Anya?
Hey, so I was just thinking about like your dishwasher point and just kind of like how it isn't really clear whether having more or less money makes it easier or harder to be easy to reduce your carbon footprint. Sometimes with the extra resources, it is so much easier to feed into consumeristic culture and increase your carbon footprint that way. But also with those resources, I guess you do have the ability to invest in these more efficient appliances, electric vehicles, things like that. So, I mean, I guess I really don't have a point, but just like thinking about the different things you can do with your money.
think what really matters is the mindset, because you could still have a lot of money and not get sucked into consumerism. So it really just depends on how you think, I think.
Okay, Konik, you want to add something? Go ahead. Also, I think after this, we had a few more discussion questions in mind, but this has already started an interesting discussion. So maybe after this, we'll go to EJ's presentation.
Yeah, like I was just thinking about like the dishwasher thing. And like when I thought about that, like in India, we usually use like buckets instead of like normal standing showers. So like the buckets like reduce a lot of the water waste. So yeah, like that kind of traditions are there, I guess.
Okay, cool. I think this was pretty fun. And now I think EJC will be giving a presentation on environmental justice and about what they do. So yeah, you guys can go ahead.
Awesome, thank you all of you. I really enjoyed listening in on that discussion, everything everyone was saying. So we have a short presentation of our own. We're just going to talk about what environmental justice is and a little bit more about our organization. And this is just a brief overview of that. Azalea, do you want to introduce EJC?
Yeah. So we are the Environmental Justice Collective, and we are one of the project teams within the larger overarching organization at our university called the Campus Environmental Center. And a lot of what we have a lot of different branches of what we do. One of the things we do are educational events, and I think this falls underneath that category, this collaboration with LEAP. But basically, we research certain topics and then present that to the public in an effort to advocate for those that for the populations that we are researching about, as well as raise awareness about these certain issues. And secondly, we are targeting curriculum change within the UT curricula for across every department is our hope. So this means that we're currently working with student government and Senate of the campus in order to pass this joint resolution that will hopefully instigate conversation and allow professors to have a method of getting environmental justice integrated into their coursework. We're also very active on social media, and pretty soon you'll be able to see on the next slide what we've been doing, what we've been posting. But another avenue to get our word out is social media, and we're active across all platforms. And community, EJC has been built on community, and this is how we first started. Is there was a group of like-minded individuals who saw that there was a need for a safe space where people of color could speak on these issues in a way that it was productive and non-judgmental. Yeah, and we hope that with, oh, cool. Yeah, we hope that with every event that we host, we can give the public some actionable items that they can pursue and kind of create this ripple effect. Okay. We're good to go now.
Okay, on this slide, we have just some examples of these past events. These are the different social media promotional graphics. So beyond the glass jar, that was one we talked about how waste relates to environmental racism, and what this looks like is actually something we'll be discussing in our breakout rooms today, but just how the location of facilities was near poorer populations and people of color rather than rich white populations. We also held an event on divestment, just talking about like how the climate change doesn't impact everyone. Climate change does not impact everyone equally, and how the movement needs to incorporate that. And then Indigenous land sovereignty, talking about how oil pipelines also infringe on Indigenous land sovereignty and their right to their own land. So there's just some examples. And then, so I'm gonna go into talking about all right, so I just realized I was on the wrong presentation. which is why it looked different. Sorry about that. Okay. Here you go, Azalea.
Okay, I was having a mini crisis over here, but we're good now. So I just want to talk a little bit, or just show you guys what we've been up to this month. Actually, we've been up to a lot. Besides this collaboration, we've had our first volunteer event where we were able to reach out to this school-based farm and help them out with mulching, lopping, and weeding, just working with our hands and knees on the earth, as well as promoting a lot about this Red Alert initiative that we've been really pushing for the past 2 weeks. Because environmental justice ties in both social issues and environmental issues, this Red Alert initiative, we're hoping, is to help destigmatize menstruation, address period poverty, as well as address the zero waste movement. So it ties all different multidisciplinary aspects across. And yeah, we're very active on our social media. Our Instagram is UTEJ Collective. And if you're interested, you can follow us just to see what we're up to.
All right, so we're gonna get into talking a little bit about what environmental justice is. And I mean, you can guess from our organization name, that is the primary focus of what we do. I have here the definition from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which, like the name sounds, is literally just one of the government departments that takes care of environmental stewardship. But environmental justice is about the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, and with respect to the implementation, enforcement, development of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And now you might be wondering, why isn't this already implied? Why aren't people being treated equally, regardless of any identity, when it comes to environmental actions? And it follows a trend that we see with a lot of other stuff, a lot of other discrimination, such as housing and just school, that people who aren't white, people who aren't rich, people of different national origins, so immigrants or low income. We can even add in other identities this definition is lacking, such as if they're part of the LGBTQ community, or if they are part of the disabled community, that they face environmental burdens more so than rich white men. I forgot to mention gender as one of the other ones, but they face these environmental burdens more. And so this movement in the US arose from when a toxic waste facility was going to be located in a county that was 95% Black and one of the poorest in the community. And so they started to raise awareness and say, hey, this isn't okay. This landfill being located here will actually be very detrimental to our health. And out of that, we got this movement that was trying to raise awareness of how certain people are affected more by environmental issues. I mentioned climate change already. We can talk about like Indigenous people being affected by pipelines, et cetera. And then once this movement began to grow, part of the problem was also just making the environmental movement more inclusive. And so earlier people talked about like, how does money play a role into how sustainable you can be? So how do we make the movement so more inclusive such that you don't need to buy the latest technology to be a part of the movement? You don't have to be 100% pure vegan to be an environmentalist. Like all of you here, regardless of whether you are 100% vegan or not, you are still an environmentalist and you guys still do important work. So making the environmental movement more inclusive was part of the goals of the environmental justice movement. And so I've kind of touched on this already, but a big part of environmental justice is knowing that we have these systems in place, not just in the US, but globally, whether they're political, economic, or social, and they lead to environmental injustices for certain communities based on identity, as I mentioned earlier. And examples of this can also include like healthcare, decolonization. So a lot of countries that were colonized, India included, face these impacts of not being able to develop their own economy in the way they needed to, and how that leads to more environmental damage. So 3 themes of environmental justice. This is a little bit more general to the United States than I can say for sure globally, but 3 patterns we see in environmental justice is disproportionate siting is a big one. I have mentioned how waste facilities were located near poor communities, poor Black communities. This is what we call disproportionate siting, where you can do studies, and many studies have been done. Oh, my bad. You can do studies, and many studies have been done that show that these facilities, whether they're landfills, whether they hold toxic waste, even recycling facilities form noise pollution, that they are located near the poor communities that cannot speak up, and that will not get heard by the government because they don't have money, therefore they don't matter as much. I also mentioned systems that lead to inequality. White supremacy and capitalism are two examples. We call them systems of power. So white supremacy is just the idea in the US that white people's lives matter more. And I mean, this is actually on a global scale too. Western people, white countries, their lives, their input matters more than anyone who is not white. And this leads to all these issues where people don't care if Black communities are facing more severe impacts of pollution and so on. Capitalism is a big one as well. That is about exploiting people for profit. So their lives don't matter as much. And we see this with companies that don't treat their laborers well, companies that do not care whether they're polluting or not, companies that are looking for the cheapest, most efficient way possible and don't look at environmental or long-term impacts. So capitalism and white supremacy are two examples of systems that lead to some of the environmental inequalities we see. And these environmental inequalities, like I mentioned, affect some people more than they do others. And so the last thing I want to touch on, it might actually be the last thing, but one of the last things I want to touch on is the idea of individualized action versus collective action. And so I really like this graphic because it shows how here the little fish are all taking individualized steps to combat not just environmental justice, but anything in environmentalism. But because the systems and our problem is so large, it's hard for them, for each person to do it individually. Versus in the second graphic, you can see when everyone's working together, they're all swimming in the same direction and they all have a common goal in mind, they are much more prepared to combat these injustices. And so based on the discussion we were having earlier, a lot of you gave some really great examples of this. We talked about a lot of individualized lifestyle changes, such as using a more efficient dishwasher or recycling and making sure you're sorting your waste properly. What collective work, while that's important, what we want to do is also translate that into collective work. And so what that can look like is either maybe contacting a company and asking them to use recyclable materials if their materials aren't recyclable. And the reason that that's collective work is because once a company is able to make that change, it has a much larger scale of impact than if it was just one person, if it was just me doing the work. With climate change, again, carbon footprint, that's an individualized step. But if a collective work could be all of us working together to maybe find a new solution. You see companies that are researching like carbon capture technology. That's an example of collective work. Okay, Catherine, take it away.
Hi, yeah, so we just thought it'd be interesting with all that we're talking about for environmental justice in the United States and India. It'd be interesting to talk about some more current events that have occurred regarding both. And so COP26 has, I think it's been going on for a month and it just recently ended. But it's an annual international climate summit among world leaders. If you don't know what it is, many people from all around the world come, both international leaders and industries and activists all come and say their piece about how they think environmental justice should occur and carbon emissions and climate change issues. So one of the big things that was interesting is that the fossil fuel industry had a really large turnout. They actually had a really big funding in the program itself. So that's really interesting when we're talking about world leaders coming together, talking about carbon emissions. There was also big discussion about developed nations such as the United States and the UK providing reparations for the developing countries that are going to have to bear a larger amount of the burden of the carbon that is being emitted. I believe that the United States said a couple years ago that they would provide $100 billion in reparations, and that still hasn't come. And a lot of developing countries are very upset about this. And so that was a really big issue and topic discussed at the event. Another thing, specifically with the US and India. So with the United States, there was a really big thing thing that happened where the United States and China agreed that they would start talking about an agreement working towards pollution reduction and carbon emissions. And so that was a really big deal. But unfortunately, days later, Biden sold more oil and gas leases days after the climate summit ended. So that was upsetting for a lot of people of, okay, we just had this long month and you're going ahead and providing access for people to continue drilling. And then India said that they would go carbon neutral by 2070, but then later they rechanged the phrasing to be phased down. So instead of getting rid of coal completely, India has now said that they're just going to try to reduce how much coal they are dependent upon. So I guess that's something we should think about, is with these big international conferences, how successful really are they when it comes to carbon reduction? Especially, I know that one of the big things people wanted was to get us down to 1.5 degrees. And I don't remember, but I think we're not at a place where 1.5 degrees is currently going to be available, just by with how the agreement was figured out. So just wanted to recap on COP26.
All right. So that pretty much concludes our presentation portion. And we're just going to go into some discussion questions. One thing, we don't have as much time as we would have liked for the discussion questions, so I will be changing gears a little, but what we wanted to talk about is, how do you think we can apply these environmental justice principles and integrate that with what Leap was talking about earlier with just environmentalism in India? And how do you make that work? And what would the environmental justice movement, or what should it look like in India going forward? Go ahead, Shrishti.
Yes, I think a lot of the things you mentioned was actually applicable even over here. So things like, getting people from all backgrounds, like all across India, not just the urban areas, including raising awareness in rural areas, making sure everyone has access, especially able people. And a lot of the times, so in India, there used to be something called the caste system, and obviously it's abolished now, but it doesn't mean that informally people still, especially in the rural areas, informally people may still believe in it, right? And the lower castes are often, given tasks of things that may not be the best interest of their own, right? And maybe incorporating that into environmental justice and giving them things that, like obviously equalizing everything, but also making sure everyone is contributing enough to their environment, and it's not just the lower castes, even though that's abolished. But yeah, that could be an interesting perspective.
Stuti?
I'd just like to add to what Shrishti said. So, I think before we can actually get to a point where environmental justice is being achieved, it's very important that we just come together as a community. Because as Shrishti said, while officially the caste system is abolished, there's still so much discrimination that takes place. And until that actually stops, there is no way we can come together as a community and have environmental justice, right? So I think that's just step one.
Olivia?
Yeah, so I think one of the points you mentioned was how rich people have a significant advantage, as to people don't specifically point out their mistakes as to how maybe they can litter around the environment. People are afraid to speak up to them, someone who's more popular, something like that. Whereas the more minor communities, generally like the people who aren't as rich as them, often get blamed for those sort of things. And so maybe it's important to bring about that change and make sure that everyone, no matter who you are, probably look after the environment and make sure that you're doing your part, and try to make even those people realize that the mistakes that they've done, and sort of bring about that kind of change.
Yeah, those are some great points. I really like how Stuti and Shrishti brought up the caste system, and it's not a complete movement unless it includes everyone. And that problem we can see in the US too, with people who are decisions are being made about people who don't even have a say. Like I mentioned the pipelines here. And so that's like a big issue because these companies and the government will make contracts to build oil pipelines. So not only are they furthering climate change and just extracting more fossil fuels when we're supposed to be switching to renewable energy, but they aren't even consulting the indigenous communities. And so for some, these pipelines run across sacred land and then they interrupt their sources of water. So like you mentioned, that making sure that everyone is able to have a say is very important. We can do Stuti and then Siddhant.
All right. So as you said, making sure that the right people are consulted is very important, like especially at the state level in India. I think when governments take decisions related to the environment, a very small part of it actually concerns the environment. And it's really just more about the politics and whether you can get the amount of votes you require and things like that. So I think especially when they're proposing policies and bills are being passed, it's very important to make sure that environmentalists are consulted and that people who understand the environment much better than politicians do are consulted, and that people are taking informed decisions and you're not taking goals that are very unachievable either, so that you shouldn't reach a point where you're not able to achieve your goal either. So I think it's very important to maintain that balance.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I think you raised an important point about how decisions are taken without consulting the right people. And I think it was also interesting that at COP26, especially, a lot of companies in the fossil fuel industry were also involved in discussions on carbon footprint and carbon dioxide emissions. And I think that just shows how these, especially a lot of these oil companies or industries which generate a lot of carbon emissions, they have a lot of influence in the government, primarily because and the government's decisions because they're a major source of government revenue. And I think in India itself, because of this, a lot of local communities, the livelihoods of local communities are being affected because of these decisions. For example, I think like a couple decades ago, I think there was, not the most recent example, but in India, there was this movement called the Narmada Bachao Andolan, which is essentially so the Narmada is a major river in India, and a lot of there was this huge plan to build India's largest dam system on the river, and the problem with that was it would result in the loss of a lot of forest land, and it would cause a lot of and it would destroy the natural habitats of a large number of animal species, and also the local communities which were living around the Narmada River, because I don't remember exactly, but I think it would cause the river to be diverted and all of that. And so for 15 years, there was this whole movement that was going on to try and bring the local communities, the voice of the local communities into the picture and regarding decision making. And I think ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled that they initially ruled that the project would be stopped, but then later on again they revised it and said the project could continue, but under certain conditions. So despite having such a big movement that went on for like over 10-15 years, bringing in the voice of local communities is still proved to be very difficult and was not completely successful. And yeah, I think that just goes to show how big an influence a lot of these large corporations and organizations have on the government. And it's important we need to figure out a way how we can increase the influence of the people whose voices actually matter, those who are actually being affected by these decisions.
You brought up some really great points, Siddhant. I especially like the ending about how these corporations and governments have so much influence And that's part of the reason why we need collective action, where all of us are speaking up. Like you think about like protests, that's like many different voices versus just one person saying, hey, this is a problem. And also, like I mentioned with capitalism, like that's why all these companies had such a voice at COP26, rather than, like you said, people whose voice matters. They were not given a say in that. We can have Conic, and then I think we need to wrap up. I know that we can probably, this is such a great discussion, we can probably keep going for a while, but it is 10 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the US.
Right. So like I had like a different point about like how government policies can sometimes be influenced by the local community's actions itself and not by larger corporations. So like I think back in 2 years back, if I'm not mistaken, there was a major case in the Delhi, the Green Tribunal of India, about how farmers in India were committing to acts of stubble burning in order to make their crops, in order to grow crops for the next harvesting season. So these farmers used to burn their crops when they had like, I think, overproduction of the crops. So when that happened, it led to like, I think, fumes throughout. It led to like air pollution and to like, I think if I'm not mistaken, there was like a hazardous air alert in New Delhi because of the amount of stubble that was burned by these farmers in order to prepare their crops for the next growing season. So like it shows that like, and I think as far as I remember, the government action that was taken was to stop the burning. And I think they gave them some kind of a compensation so that they could grow crops for the next harvesting season. So like it shows that like how probably like as like a different perspective, like how probably the community's actions itself could provoke government action into these kind of things. So yeah.
I like that. I think that's a great note to end on. That's a great point you brought up. So just want to thank all of you for being here today. And I really enjoyed both the presentations and the discussions. And I'm still kind of mind blown that we just did an international event and that wasn't just us here in Austin. So that was really cool. Thank you guys for reaching out to us. Azalea, Conic, Siddhant, any final words?
Yeah, I think for me, there was so much more that I think I wanted to ask, and it was very mind-blowing to hear your side of things. And I think just unfortunately due to time, I couldn't ask, but I think there's like a lot of interest on my part, and it's very cool to be able to connect like this through Zoom.
Yeah, I think I also enjoyed it a lot. And one thing I liked was we got to hear about different perspectives and a different culture. And I wasn't really aware of environmental justice a lot. And I think this made me realize how important of an issue it is, and also how we see it in decisions all around us. So yeah, I think I love learning a lot from all of you.
Yeah, I think it was an amazing opportunity, like to meet like-minded individuals who are very like knowledgeable about environmental affairs. And as Siddhant rightly mentioned, like I also have no experience in environmental justice, so it gave quite a different perspective on what environmental action needs to compromise today. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. For me, it's also really, I guess, uplifting to see that there are despite there being like similarities in the issues we face, that means that we can work together. We all face similar problems in the environmental movement. But have a great rest of your weekend, and hopefully we can do something else again next semester.
Yeah, looking forward.